YOLO, folks.
YOLO. This is the summer of YOLO in NBA free agency. Welcome to HoopSpeak Live. I'm Beck Mason. With me is Zach Harper in a really sharp new haircut. Very Tom Cruise, Top Gun era. How you doing, man?
I'm fantastic. Actually, I'm not fantastic. I'm stressed out by the Timberwolves. I'm stressed out by the offseason, and I am by the fact that for some reason we're comparing eras every single day.
All right. Well, before you get to the many things that grind your gears, we should announce that Jack McCallum, the Jack McCallum, who probably is going to fire his publicist after being on the show, will be on HoopSpeak Live in just 15 minutes. And then right after that, good friend of the show, the New York Times, Howard Beck, will be dropping by from the New York Times building. And Ethan will also be here at some point. He was on here and then left. Maybe his dog ate the power cord. He's staying out in Concord right now, where his mom has the two largest dogs I've ever seen in that kind of proximity. But first, Zach, I actually don't have any idea what the answer is to this question. What is going on in Minnesota?
Okay, I think I know this one. The Timberwolves are trying to get Nicholas Batum, who's a restricted free agent. The problem is that the Blazers don't want to give him to the Wolves because they don't like any of the Wolves' assets. There was talk of 2 first-round picks and Kyle Korver coming over from the Bulls through the Wolves to get the deal done. There's also talk of Derek Williams involved. There's been talk of Martell Webster. They amnestied Darko. They're going to buy out Brad Miller. They signed Alexei Shved. They're signing Brandon Roy. I think they're going to try to bring back Luke Longley or Christian Laettner. There's so much going on, and none of it's going to work. And okay. I mean, by the end of the day, Batum will have an official offer sheet and sign it. Once that happens, sign and trade is out. The Blazers can either match or not. Here's what I like about what's happening, at least for the Blazers side. Neil O'Shea has been a colossal a-hole this entire time.
Yes! What's the deal with that? I was going to ask about that. He's being so mean to Minnesota.
Wolves fans are mad, but it's fantastic theater. I mean, it's really fantastic. I think Tim Allen from Candace Hoopus was saying, like, how great would this... No, not the Tool Man. The blog man. I think he was saying, like, how fantastic would this be if this were a movie? And I immediately thought, like, this is just like The Social Network, only with really awful GMs.
Middling teams.
Just rude to each other. And I really think that could be a great thing because you have O'Shea trying to take the championship from Khan for the worst public relations GM in the league, which is fantastic. I mean, Khan has been at the top forever. And O'Shea just coming and taking it. I love it.
Yeah, I think that people underestimate how Minnesota actually has the most under-the-radar crazy fan bases in any kind of city like that. Like, Minnesota fans, I didn't even realize knew who the Timberwolves are, and now I've got a couple friends who live there or grew up there, and they're, like, furious with O'Shea and, want Batum so bad. Does anyone know why Batum wants to go to Minnesota so badly? Is he just trying to drive up the price?
No, he wants Rubio, he wants Edelman, and he wasn't happy with how the Blazers used him. That's it.
Yeah, with the whole Wallace thing.
Yeah. The whole Wallace thing, and then on top of that, there's history because the Blazers hate how the Timberwolves were basically like a proxy for Tom Penn to try to get a raise through him when he was being shopped around for David Kahn's job before David Kahn had it. And the Wolves accused the Blazers of hiding medical information on Martell Webster when they acquired him because he had a bad back, and they just didn't use Google yet. They had no idea what that was. I think they were trying to figure out Bing at the time, and none of it worked. And so there's all this tension between Paul Allen and Glenn Taylor. It's fantastic drama.
All right. Well, that's actually a great breakdown, and I feel very informed. But now I'm going to just completely move away from you and bring in Ethan Sherwood Strauss, who is with us. He is back Concord did not slip into the sea. We're going to do our Take the Bacon, and our debate is about how perceptions of Howard have shifted through this whole free agent process. I'm going to let you lay the framework, and I'll object to anything I don't agree with in the terms of this debate.
I think what we're trying to figure out is whether or not Dwight Howard is underrated or overrated, and I would posit this. I believe that Dwight Howard was very underrated until a bunch of fan bases had the ability to get him, and then suddenly he got overrated because people desperately wanted him to help their team. And I would say only slightly overrated. I find him very difficult to categorize and rank against other players because you have somebody who's fantastic at defense, but at the same time, defense is very system dependent, and we don't entirely know if he would have the same impact on somebody who isn't Stan Van Gundy's team. So I wouldn't place him as the second best player, as Dan Le Batard did. Perhaps you would, Beckley. I want to know where you rank him. I still have Wade and Chris Paul above Howard at this point.
I might be willing to put Paul on that level, but not Wade, I think, anymore. I think his ability to contribute has declined in a way that, maybe Wade 2 years ago is above Howard. Here's the thing I can tell you about Howard, is that it's not difficult to figure out how to use him, right? Like, you allow him to move on defense and protect the paint, and then on offense you have him setting a lot of screens and occasionally flashing for a low post look. So it's not like Stan Van Gundy had some incredibly brilliant, plan to take advantage of this weird talent. Like, he is a prototypical super athletic big man. And if you can use him correctly, even if you've got Hato Turkoglu as like your second best player, you're going to be a 2 seed every year. That to me is really, really impressive. And I think that he just, like, the proof is sort of in the pudding when you look at the rosters and you look at, yes, they were very well coached, but they were very well coached because they had a system into which they could put Dwight Howard.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I just player into which they could put that system and then make it all work well. You get it.
I wonder, though, how much of that system just relied on coaches being stupid and acting as though Dwight Howard was Shaq in 1995. Because it would drive me crazy over the years to see these teams double-team Dwight Howard. He's not that good. He's not that good an offensive player. You do not have to double-team him down low. But he does this other strange thing Dwight Howard does where he's pretty bad at handling double teams and often gets ripped. So it's almost as though he's tempting teams to make the wrong decision and to fuel that Orlando three-point attack. So there are funny elements to Dwight Howard on offense, and I think I would point to against Atlanta, that first-round exit against a worse Atlanta Hawks team happened because they just decided to single up Dwight Howard. He produced very good individual numbers, but it totally crippled the Orlando offensive attack, and I just wonder, would he be that effective, and would he have been that effective for Orlando if teams just weren't stupid about guarding him?
That's an interesting question, but I think it's sort of not the point, because if you put shooters around him and a decent point, like Jameer Nelson's like not a good player, and if you have a good point guard who can turn the corner and finish at the rim or shoot, and you have Howard rolling to the rim, he can catch everything, he can dunk everything, and I do think that you are I think you're underrating his ability on the block. There are matchups that he cannot overcome that are maddening, like that Big Baby, for instance, could put his fat butt on Howard, and he couldn't figure it out. It's just like, okay, come on, you need to step out, move, whatever, get to that jump hook. But I still think Howard is improving. He's going to be 27, I think, when the next season starts. 27 to 33, typically when big men learn to shoot, and when they learn, they increase their skill level. So I still think Howard offensively has more to give. I would disagree a little bit with your assessment on passing out of doubles. I mean, we would need to go to actual numbers, but I think he's better than, say, Bynum at passing out of double teams, especially to weeks. Yeah, he is. Bynum actually, though, is like really bad. He got better as the season went on, but Howard is great because, as you say, there was a system that he understood. He was smart enough to know every time where to look to make that pass cross court, which then they threw to the corner where they could hit the three.
Yeah, well, I just love that let's compare him to Bynum. Let's compare him to someone like Tim Duncan if we're going to talk about passing out of double teams. I think that both those players, the two best centers,
Wait,
are
who double teams Tim Duncan these days?
nobody. But, back in the day, just pointing to back in the day. By the way, I want to argue Wade because a lot of people got mad at me for saying, how dare Wade's better than Howard? Well, he's been getting, I know he doesn't have the defensive impact that Howard does, but at least in terms of offensive efficiency and production, he's been better than Howard, and I feel like there's a bit of forgot about Wade happening right now.
Wade forgot about Wade in the playoffs. Did you see that?
Yeah, well, he was operating on a knee that needed surgical repair. And
that's good news. That's good news. No, I want that 31-year-old guard with the surgically repaired knee. That's definitely what I want instead of a 26-year-old 7-footer or 6'10"er.
There's some genius to Wade's game. I think there's some genius to Wade's game
Certainly.
That will not fade, and I have concerns about his durability going forward. But I think paying his demise forward, we've already fast-forwarded. You say forward again when we're not talking about forwards at all. We're talking about centers and two guards, where we've gone, he's already over the hill. I don't think this is true. I wouldn't be surprised to see Wade come back and give us another 26 or 27 PER season. I think he's still great, and he was just injured for a stretch in the summertime, and that people are jumping to conclusions and living in the moment. We're being prisoners in the moment, as is it Jalen Rose who always says that? Yeah, as Jalen Rose always says. Forgot about Wade.
Wow. Couple things here. I don't like that you threw Howard under the bus for double teams. I think he's actually pretty proficient passing out of double teams.
I will say he does average 3. Yeah, last year he's had over 3 turnovers basically every year. He's been a relevant offensive player, but
yeah.
I mean he once he dribbles into the lane.
Braun, whatever.
Yeah, Steve Nash has like 4 games. Nobody cares about that.
Wait a second. Have you ever seen Howard make a pass and go, whoa, nice pass? Like, how often does that happen? That never happens. When does that happen?
Blame the system, Ethan. I'm going to blame the system. Everyone's just standing around the 3-point line.
I've never seen a pass go to Jameer Nelson where I thought, good idea. So it doesn't matter if it's a good pass or a bad pass. Here's my problem with your argument, is that you tried to bring in Dr. Dre at the end, and I don't really respect that. Here's why. Because in The Chronic 2001, he claims that his last album was The Chronic and totally disregards the awful catastrophe that was Aftermath, which is an atrocious album. So the fact that you would remind me of that, I'm awarding Beckley the bacon.
The rap police are coming to arrest Zach. That's what I heard in the background there.
All right, bacon received and eaten, and it is delicious.
You didn't even officially say that you want it. Anyway,
yeah, you did. You said you're giving me the bacon. That's why I did this dance.
And you're not even listening. That's the other reason I went against you.
You know what? That's what hurts the most, Ethan. You don't even care.
Okay, guys. Well, I think I'm going to sign out. I'm going to run back to the salt mines and do whatever it is I do. I wish you a fantastic interview of Jack when he's on, or when he's invited. Wait, I think I screwed up the programming. This is very awkward.
Wait, what?
I don't think I'm supposed to be off yet. But just for the sake of flow, I'm gonna hand it off to you guys. I'm gonna sign out right now. I'm gonna get back to
I think you've served your purpose this show, Ethan.
Wow.
All right, thank you, James. Peeping James Herbert, as always, on the cameras, working the multi-shot, getting rid of Ethan there. All right, let's just get to it. The moment we've been waiting for, the moment he finds out he needs to fire his publisher, or his publicist. Let's bring on writer of the new Dream Team book, called Dream Team, Jack McCallum. Hey, Jack, how's it going? Oh, he... Uh-oh. Is he muted? What's working here? Oh no. All right, I think he may be frozen right now. Yeah, technical difficulty smash indeed. Avi Raging Bulls. Man, for a while I thought he was just really angry at us and just staring there like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is the worst 12 minutes of my life. We're gonna try to get that.
He was like, "We're done. This is not
happening." Yeah. Oh, wow. Really, really nice tweets there. In the meantime, let's get to a list of the worst contracts that have been given out so far in free agency. And I'm actually curious what you guys think are the worst. Put it in the chat. We got Landry Fields, 20 mil, 3 years. Controversial, George Hill, 40 mil, 5 years. I'm actually kind of okay with that one. Hibbert, 5 years, $58 million for a guy who averaged 13 points a game. He plays 29 minutes. Brooke Lopez, 4 years, $61 million. It's a good time to be 7 feet tall. Gerald Wallace, 4 for 40. Beasley, 18 million, 3 years. Ashi, 25 million, 3 years. Hawes, 13 million, 2 years. That one's fine with me. Kidd, 9 million, 3 years. Jeff Green, 36 million over the next 4 years.
That's the one. As much as I was arguing with Nets fans about the whole Brooke Lopez contract for an incessant 18 hours the other day, Jeff Green, coming off heart surgery, wasn't good to begin with. It's 4 years? Why would
4 years.
Coming off heart surgery, 4 years.
Yeah.
That's insane to me. I would be totally... I don't care about the money at all. It's 4 years.
Yeah, the $9 million is an amount you can imagine him playing to, especially on a team that's okay spending. But when you're putting that at 4 years, then you're saying he's one of the pieces that we're going to rebuild, in the Rajon Rondo era around. And maybe that's a good plan. Maybe he'll work out well with Rondo. I don't know who knows, but 4 years, as you say, seems just completely unnecessary. They must have thought that the somewhat athletic, kind of can shoot, decent at dribbling, pretty good passer market for wing players to back up Paul Pierce was really shallow this year.
He is really good on Twitter. I will say that. Like he made fun of Kevin Durant saying he was 6'7" and stuff. Like he's been good on Twitter. That's got to be worth at least a year.
Yeah, Jeff Green is a bad one. Are there any in that list that I read? Okay, so Hibbert, I think, where do you stand on Hibbert? Hibbert's a really interesting one to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think a max coming off a rookie contract is that bad. So I'm okay with it.
Oh, there he is. Hold on. Jack, can you hear us?
I can. Hold on. I was talking to your expert. Hold on a second. I'm hanging up.
So not even.
Okay, I'm here.
All right. Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I don't know if you saw, I did a review of your book. You did a review of your book on HoopSpeak. I really loved it. It was a lot of fun to read. And I did want to ask you again about the way that you structured the book, because really you're writing a story that in many ways doesn't have a climax. And still you were able to create the sense of environment and the sense of things building towards something. Can you talk about why you decided to structure the book in the small chapters that kind of traced a few different narratives?
Well, I guess I kind of have a short attention span, so the shorter a chapter was, the better I was next thing. No, I think that once I got rolling, it kind of had this natural chronology to it, because I saw it as a book that talked about the whole generations. Once I sort of got the prologue out of the way, because I wanted to get my Larry Bird, how are we going to put the air?
You can say it. This is the internet.
Yeah. I saw it as it kind of talked about the whole generation. So I sort of began with 1984 with Jordan and Ewing, and it kind of it kind of built, just as it went. I tried to take a key part of a player's career, for example, Pippen's migraine game and then Mully's alcoholism, and sort of tried to fit that into chronologically. The only, quote, tricky thing, none of this is rocket science as we know, was figuring out where to put the interlude chapters, which was my kind of contemporary interviews with him when I felt there was really something that had to be removed in the narrative. And I just picked the spot kind of almost, not arbitrarily, I tried to come off of a chapter in which I had talked about that particular player, and it seemed to be an easy transition into talking about the guy now. So I think it, I hope it worked out pretty logical. That's the best I could do.
I wanted to ask about, so I thought for me it was really interesting to learn about some of the players I don't make you feel too old there that I really didn't see growing up. Malone is one of the guys I did see a lot of. I was a Sonics fan. We had a pretty decent rivalry with the Jazz for a while in the 90s. Never struck me as a very likable character and didn't seem in the book to be someone I would want to spend an extra minute with. Can you redeem Malone for me? And is he someone that's just sort of hard to feel that way about? Well, for some reason, I had written in there that Malone and I can't think of two more different people. I mean, he's a rural kid from the South. I mean, I'm from the East. He's a conservative Republican who goes on, Fox News. I mean, I'm a wimpy, flaccid-wristed liberal. I've never even shot a squirrel. But for some reason, I always kind of liked Carl. It was sort of just dealing with him like performance art. I mean, he was kind of like in his own world, but his ability to go between being a really nice guy and anger is sort of incredible, and you could really get a sense of him as a competitor. So I can't say I incredibly knew him a lot, but when I met him back and wanted to arrange this interview, I mean, this is kind of a personal thing. I didn't tell this anywhere, but I see him back in Springfield getting inducted, and Carl said to me, "Jack, I always enjoyed talking to you. You never really changed." And I like that a lot. I mean, I first met him in the mid-'80s. This is 25 years later. And I guess that's how he saw me. And maybe to a certain extent, that's how I saw him. So maybe we communicated on some other kind of level. But I always liked him. Don't ask me to explain it beyond that.
Jack, I've been a huge fan of 7 Seconds or Less, and then I love The Dream Team. Just two fantastic books. You share a story about you and I can't remember the other reporter's name, but going for a photo op with the Dream Team. And I believe you got that opportunity right before the gold medal game. Can you explain to our audience, as a credentialed member of the media, how awkward that is? Especially, in those days, it was probably a little bit more old school than what it's become now. I mean, that's just not something that reporters were supposed to do, right?
Right. Up a little bit, but I think I know what you're talking about. David Dupree, a friend of mine who worked for USA Today. David was a very straightforward guy, and beginning of the Olympics, David says, "Hey, man, we should get our picture taken with the Dream Team." And trust me, if there's one person on earth less likely to make that suggestion than me, it would be David Dupree. But I tell you what it showed. It showed what was going on at the time. Incredible, just the buzz around these guys that we would even think of it. So we went out to dinner with Carl, the previous subject, Karl Malone, because I knew Carl very well, and David, Carl, and I, we raised it with Carl. He says, "Hey, let me bring it up to Magic," because we run all that stuff by him. Well, time passes, and this was the beginning of the games. Time passes, and we don't hear anything about it, which is fine with me, because I never even got an autograph for my sons all this time. Well, before the gold medal game, somebody from the NBA comes and goes, "All right, they're going to take that picture of you guys now." And I said, "What? You got to be kidding me. They're on their way to play Croatia." And they took us back, back in the locker room tunnel, which you can't get at the Olympics. It's not like an NBA arena. And out comes the Dream Team, and they're clapping their hands and, shouting, "Let's go kick Croatia's ass." And All of a sudden, they stop. Magic tells them to stop, and Dupree and I slide into the picture. They take this photo, which comes out looking like something from the school trip to Wildwood, in 6th grade. And Larry Bird, the back row, to make some comment. Hey, Jack, later on, maybe you want to do something else. It just spoke absolute horror of what it seemed to be doing, which is sucking up to athletes. And I really, if there's one thing in my career I tried not to do, would be that. I mean, we all have to use some whatever flattery or wiles we have once in a while, but I mean, I never did anything like that. So in retrospect, what it did the most was furnish as a prologue for my book. So I'm glad I actually did it.
A lot of fun stories like that of you talking about your own experience, getting sort of swept up in the whole lead up to Barcelona, which, as you wrote, was sort of, I mean, in terms of basketball writer covering basketball, sort of a dud. What are some of your favorite moments from the time before you went to Barcelona and when you knew that you were going to be following around this team?
I think the favorite moment, and I think anybody that covered this team might say that. I've talked to some of the guys, and one case a woman that covered the team, and we all loved Portland. Portland was the place that they had to play a qualifying tournament, and what it was the first time this team was going to be together. And so there was a kind of expectation about it. And even if you're the most hard-boiled, cynical journalist in the world, you wanted to see what it was like when Bird, Magic, Michael came out on the court. You wanted to see, holy crap, they're together on one team. And it was even sort of better than we thought, because we're waiting to see. We figured Magic would be the captain. And that kind of stuff was important back then. Who's going to be the captain? Who's he going to start? Who's going to take the first shot? So they run out. Magic's leading the way, as he should be. Larry was second, as I recall. Everybody else filed in. But the moment they came out, Cuba sunk to its knees, abandoned the layup to its knees, grabbed cameras, and started taking pictures. I mean, it was truly extraordinary that this kind of attention would be bestowed upon a team. And that sort of set the tone, and that kind of happened to different degrees in the next 13 games they played, but it was never as good as that first moment in Portland. That's what I remember the most about covering. That's what was sort of really special to me.
We talked about Karl Malone a little bit. His teammate, John Stockton, really, between the documentary that was on NBA TV and this book, just fascinated me even more than before. Is he, one of the most interesting, boring guys that has ever existed?
I gotta credit Bill Simmons with what I thought was the best line of a 700-page book, which was rooting for John Stockton was like having sex for 19 years in the missionary position. I mean, that's a great line. I wish I would call it. John, I found John interesting because I kept trying to unlock him, and you kept looking at him, and we always say to myself, you guys probably played basketball, and that's the sport I love. If I would have had some kind of will, how good could I have been if I wasn't some lazy-ass kid who rather, didn't work on my game all the time? John Stockton's the one guy you could look at. I mean, he is your size. He's our skin color. He came from a middle-class family. Now, let's not underestimate John's physical gifts. He has gigantic hands, and he has obviously great hand-eye coordination, but mine isn't bad either.
Spatial understanding.
There's this guy that's the leading assist and steal guy of all time. I mean, it's extraordinary. His guard is always up. And the story I relate in the book is gone to Spokane. He picks me up in the car. He's got a brace on his leg. And I said, how'd you get that? He goes, pick up basketball. I start to write it down. He goes, why is that interesting? I go, John, I didn't fly 3,000 miles not to write anything down, So he was the same from the moment he came into the league. to the moment he left.
Nice. Player that, this is sort of shifting a little bit, but a player who modeled his game after something, Steve Nash, who you covered about as well as anybody for your book, 7 Seconds or Less, is now going to a team, and I find this very interesting, who he was able to hurt with the style of play that, so basically the style of play that Nash was so good at was the exact style that hurt the Lakers because they couldn't keep up. Now he's going to the Lakers. What kind of a fit is that in your mind?
Well, he is going to the Lakers 6 years later. Steve is a little bit different. I mean, what makes Steve, in my opinion, still an incredibly special player is he hit shots.
Right.
That if you come down and you can hit a shot from 24 feet, they got to guard you. And the moment they got to push up on you, he's by you. What I see from Steve is at least a step or a step and a half slower.
Yes.
But you still have to guard the guy. So to a certain extent, he can still play that style. And what I think he does is just bring real life to that team because Steve is just a fantastic teammate. Kobe Bryant has one way to lead a team, and that is going to play harder than Kobe. Nobody's going to be tougher than Kobe. But I think Kobe would admit himself, well, maybe he wouldn't, that he's not the best leader, that all this you need to be a leader, the things that Kobe is lacking in that respect, Nash now has. So you're talking about at the top that is pretty damn solid with leadership. Then you get a guy like Gasol, whose basketball IQ, is off the charts. I think they're a really, really good team, although there's a little bit of let's win it now. I mean, I'm not sure Steve, I guess he got a 3-year. I'm not sure Steve's going to be winning it at 4. No, I think they're really going to go for it this year.
Yeah, and I think that the leadership dynamic between Steve and Kobe is really going to be one of the fascinating stories of this year. I was wondering if maybe you could share an anecdote or something that you saw while you had all that access to the Suns that really summed up the kind of leader that Steve really tries to be.
That's easy to me, and that is that guy, his body into this ice water. I could not stick my finger. This thing was 38, 37 degrees. Okay, he's from Canada. All right, that's one thing. That guy climbed into that tub every single night. And a guy like, not to put on Boris, I mean, I love Boris Diaw. Boris ain't getting in the tub, I'll tell you that now. Steve didn't stand there in the locker room and go, jackass has got to get in the tub. But every single one of those guys knew that Steve was in the tub. And gradually Raja got in with him. I remember Sean Marion getting in a couple times. He sets a tone of what you have to do to maximize your ability on a basketball team. And that is incredibly important. He never did it by yelling, and maybe he should do it by yelling a little bit more. Now he's got his yeller. He's got Kobe there. Yeah. And when they got to insult somebody, Kobe can do that. So I'm really anxious to see how they operate as a kind of, locker room tandem.
Jack, you mentioned Sean Marion, who in your book came off as someone who always wanted to be more respected and always wanted to be a bigger part of the equation, just in terms of, the admiration he would get and the attention he would get. I kind of took that from the Dream Team book as well with Clyde Drexler. Clyde kind of seems to be like he's a little bitter, like maybe if he comes 5 years earlier in his career or he's 5 years later, he has a much more well-regarded career outside of Portland.
I think that's probably fair. It's funny that Sean and Clyde, in their own way, are not the same guy. They're a different personality. I mean, in my own way, I really liked both of them. And one of the unfortunate things of this book is that all this tidal wave has come down upon Clyde, and there's not time to go into it. I thought the Deadspin lead into my excerpt was a little misleading. I went back and read the book. I hope the context is fuller. But Clyde is still going to take a lot of crap for what he said. And I do worry that I didn't make it clear enough how much Clyde supported Magic in terms of coming back to the league with HIV, that he was one of the guys who stood up and said, hey, he can come back. Having said that, I think Clyde's career is defined, as a lot of guys is, by who he came in with. You said it. Clyde has gone through, he came in '83. He's now gone through 30 years of essentially being compared to Michael Jordan. And I do it too. Like, I shouldn't do it. It's simplistic, but it's, and right before the Dream Team, remember, these two guys played in a final where at last we're going to get to show who's better. Well, we know who was better.
Yeah.
Micah was better. Clyde went through that year. He was the second best player in the league. He was probably the best player in the All-Star game, and he doesn't get picked for the first 10 guys. And in retrospect, I think that one of the dumbest things the Dream Team committee did was to have that stupid audition all season. They named 10 guys, and then we're going to name one NBA player later and a college guy. I thought that was really insulting to Clyde. Clyde's thing is that he won't come out and go, that insulted the crap out of me. I'm really pissed off. Here's what I think. Clyde pretends it doesn't matter and then says all these things like he's joking about it when we all know he's not joking about it. So it's easy for me to say I would have handled it better than Clyde, but I think he was in a tough position and hasn't always handled it the way he should.
Yeah, when I read that Clyde section that we've been talking about, where he's analyzing Magic, to me it was a side of Drexler that I hadn't seen, with this sort of the cold, calculating, competitive side, which is, that's how you look at someone you're competing against. You suss out the weaknesses and you focus on them. And I think that to me, that was his tone more than anything, was, as an athlete, what did I see when I looked at Magic? I looked at, and he says, I saw someone who was basically falling apart as a player slowly. He was just not the player he had been. He was out of shape when he came into the Dream Team. To me, it wasn't like a personal dig so much as it was the type of analysis, and this is something I really liked in your book, was that those are the type of things that players say about each other and think about each other, but we rarely get to read it.
Yeah, well, they also, and not that it matters what I say as much as Clyde, but I talked about this scrimmage early on and it was in the NBA documentary, did a better job than I did about it, because I didn't see it quite as important as they did, but the college team comes in, they beat the Dream Team. No matter what Krzyzewski said, we threw the game, blah, 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 maybe. Yeah. But Bobby Hurley got where he wanted to go in that game, which was into the lane. He fed to jump shots. Magic had never been a guy to guard quick guards on the perimeter. I mean, and one of the things they saw in that game was, no matter how much they wanted to whisper it, we got to put Jordan and Pippen. Jordan and Pippen have to guard the guys outside. That's not what Magic can. Double down on the post. He can play in the lanes. I mean, the guy's high in all-time steals. So you're right. What Clyde said as a basketball player, it sounded cold, and this is my hopefully final plea, and it was a little bit impolitic, but it wasn't together horrible analysis of what was going on basketball-wise.
Jack, I just want to, this might be a little too serious or somber, but, you talk about that scrimmage, and Krzyzewski thought that Chuck Daly maybe threw the game, and, just maybe like a good rallying point, a good gut check. Can you just talk about what it was like to cover Chuck Daly, especially during that time, just the kind of guy he was? He just seems to be, not a bad word is really said about him after his career and then after his death, obviously.
Well, Chuck was God, it sounds like the most incredible. There's probably not many women watching the show anyway. Chuck was the classic guy's guy. Chuck was the guy you sat around with who got along with anybody. The best way I can put it is, he had this Dream Team, and this is in the book, the Dream Team selection show, when they announced all the guys, and they addressed the controversy of the Pistons. And Charles is there in the studio. And they have Isaiah on camera saying something, and Dennis Rand is bitching, and I think Bill Laimbeer was bitching about it. And Charles Barkley, I hate those MFers. 30 seconds without even seeing any irony in it at all. Charles is asked about Chuck Daly. He goes, man, I can't wait to play for that guy. It's almost like people coached that team. It's amazing what he was able to do. And basically, he did it on the strength of being like a good guy. I remember that I did a story about him, and I ended with saying, he was a man of both style and substance. And somehow he broke and fielded his way around this Isaiah issue to the day he died. And let's right here, Chuck did not stand up for the guy that he won 2 championships with. And you could call that a pragmatic decision because he wanted Jordan more than Isaiah. He needed Jordan more than Isaiah. That's where I come down on. But I have no problem if you look at that and say, Chuck was pretty disloyal in that case. I have no problem if you say that. There's just certain guys I like so much, it's hard for me to really stand up and say that.
Yeah. All right. Well, we really appreciate all the time you had, and of course for you sharing all these stories in print and on our show today. Thank you very much for being our guest, Jack.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, that is the one and only Jack McCallum on HoopSpeak Live. Believe it.
I can go.
And now we go buy his book on Amazon, by the way. Someone will put a link in the chat. You should buy the book. It's very fun to read. It's very easy to read. The chapters are short, so if you do have a short attention span, it takes about 3 minutes per chapter, so you should be able to handle it.
Big words.
Yeah, you can email Zach directly. Right now, let's bring in our second guest, a man who will be covering the newly minted Brooklyn Nets this year for the New York Times, Howard Beck.
What's happening, guys?
Hello.
How you doing, man?
I have one small beef. How can you possibly bring me on after Jack? This is like the comedian who's trying to come on after Chris Rock. I'm screwed. I got nowhere to go with this.
I felt like Chris Farley on the Chris Farley show of like, Jack, you're awesome.
That would have been good. I've always wanted to do an interview that way.
Remember that time when you made that jumper? That was awesome. All right. Anyway, you're covering the Nets, but I really want to start off first with the Knicks. Landry Fields, are they going to pay this man?
This is a really interesting question because, a week or so ago we thought, this is crazy. What's Toronto doing? Oh, they're just trying to sabotage, which I was a little skeptical of that theory anyway. We can get back to that. But, yeah, 20 million, whatever it's going to be, pretty close to 20 million for Landry Fields is nuts. And, frankly, months ago when the Knicks were in this bind where you didn't know who was going to have early bird rights and who they could sign and who they couldn't, and I thought, well, Landry Fields is the one guy who he's probably a goner because, you could pay him, the minimum and try to squeeze him in. But some team will overpay him a little bit probably, not because he's great, but just because he's available and the Knicks had a cap crunch. But I never in a million years thought anybody was going to be paying him, 3, 4, 5, 6 million, much less almost 7 million average. So it's easy to now say, okay, look, Toronto, there was a gambit there. Maybe it backfired, and now they're going to be stuck with him. But I would just make one alternative proposal here or theory here.
Okay, lay it on me.
All right. And sorry, I am slightly incoherent from the red eye back from Las Vegas last night, which arrived in New York at 7:30 this morning. Landry Fields, he was a second-round pick, and for about 3 months he looked like the steal of the draft.
He was making threes.
Yeah, with that Amari Stoudemire, Wilson Chandler, Danilo Gallinari team, he was actually really good. And then Carmelo came, and Landry was one of the guys who had just completely receded to the background and lost his way, and has never really been the same since. But there's definitely some ability there. He is young. I think he's still got some upside there, and he's a valuable piece. The reason this is not a no-brainer and just say, let him go, he's overpaid. One, obviously because they're the Knicks and they're the career leaders in luxury tax payments in NBA history. They don't care about luxury tax or money or profits or things like that. But two is, this is a salary cap league. When Landry Fields walks out the door to Toronto, you can't just go and say, oh, I'm going to spend that $20 million on somebody else. It doesn't work that way. You've got his early bird rights, and you've got matching rights in this case. So you can keep him at $20 million and he'll be overpaid. But if he leaves, the question you have to ask is, who can you get to replace him at the league minimum? Because that's all the Knicks can spend now is the league minimum. and the field is getting thin, the market's getting thin, and how many guys are coming for the veterans minimum? So you can make the case that you should keep him just because you're already way overextended anyway. You're well into the tax. You're never going to have any flexibility anyway, so might as well keep overpaying everybody. There's my case.
Howard, you mentioned jet lag, and I personally have Dwight lag right now. Between you covering the lockout and you covering Dwight Howard, what has been worse?
That's an interesting question. The lockout was much longer and more painful in some respects. And I can cover Dwight Howard from anywhere. I don't have to sit on the East 63rd Street sidewalk outside the Lowell Hotel.
To provide you with food.
Yeah, no, and thank God once again for Larry Kuhn, not only for his salary cap fact, but for his pizza. No, the Dwight thing is
mainly for his pizza.
the most unfortunate part about the Dwight thing is that there's a certain part of this that is clearly his doing. He created the situation, but then there's the reality that follows, which is Dwight doesn't have to say anything, do anything, act any particular way for this thing to all keep coming down on him and haunting him, because the fact is it's now out of his hands to an extent. Yes, he's made it more complicated by saying he'd only re-sign with the Nets, but the fact is once a guy has a trade demand, and let's forget about how it got there or how he conducted himself, forget all that stuff for a minute. There's a trade demand. There's a deadline because he's going to be a free agent. The Magic have to act. Everything else now is up to NBA mechanics, payroll mechanics. The Magics need to get the best package back for him. And those are things that are out of Dwight Howard's hands. So where this is now becoming this prolonged drama, as the melodrama was, is largely based on, teams that have to try to figure out their best way out of this and maximize the value of guys. So it's going to drag possibly right into the next calendar year. I'm not surprised. I've been saying this for the last couple of weeks that it wouldn't surprise me if no trade happened in July, because the fact is once we get to mid-December, and then in Brook Lopez's case, mid-January, that's when guys who were signed this summer can all be traded again. So the pool of players available in a 3-team trade, a 4-team trade, however big it's going to get, is going to be bigger once the season starts, and it's specifically December 15th and then January 15th. And it'll be easier for the Magic and maybe the Nets and whoever else may be involved to construct a deal then.
Sure, and if a deal doesn't come through for the Nets, they've aligned themselves with a pretty strong starting five, assuming that they do retain Humphries, or even not, I guess, Teletovic. I don't know if I know his name right. They're looking like they're going to have a pretty good squad. What do you make of their offseason, kind of in broad strokes, and is there anything in particular that really jutted out?
Obviously, the big home run was going to be if they got Dwight Howard. Then if you got Darren Williams, Joe Johnson, Dwight Howard, immediately I would say they go straight to the top of the Eastern Conference, just right behind Miami. Because Chicago's got a big fat asterisk because of Derrick Rose's knee, and the Celtics, we'll keep underestimating.
Chicago's just selling off everybody who was good for them on the bench, apparently.
Right. Yeah. So there's this hole up there. I mean, I think after Miami and Boston, we don't really know what the Eastern Conference looks like. So Dwight Howard to the Nets, I think, would have put the Nets right up there, contending possibly for the Eastern Conference title. Not saying they'd beat Miami, but they'd be very competitive, and their strengths would be a little bit different, so it'd be interesting. Without Dwight Howard, what the Nets have is a really interesting team and a very solid team, and one that in the Eastern Conference, as we've said, might just be enough to make them really, really competitive, because I don't know how this conference will shake out next year. Do the Celtics really have one more run at that elite level left in them? Is Jason Kidd at his age and Jeremy Lin, who's still unproven over the long haul, enough to get the Knicks up into that 2 or 3 slot in the East? I think the Nets and Knicks are almost an even ground right now, which is much more fascinating here in New York, of course. Forget the rest of the NBA for a minute. But the Nets and Knicks, it's getting really close right now. And I think what the Nets have done with Joe Johnson taking some of the pressure off of Darren Williams, now Darren Williams doesn't have to be the primary playmaker and primary scorer every night. He's got a guy next to him who can do both of those things very well. Brook Lopez, for all the knocks on Brook Lopez, and many deserved, he's one of the best scoring 7-footers in the league. So, you've got three really intriguing pieces. Gerald Wallace, still a pretty good defender. Humphreys is there to rebound if they re-sign him. Tolotovic is regarded as one of the best scorers in Europe. He'll be coming off the bench. Marshawn Brooks off the bench. You've got now the core of essentially a brand new and very intriguing team. And again, one that in the Eastern Conference, as wide open as it is after Miami, I think can be pretty competitive.
You brought up Brook Lopez. Is there still lingering concern that his foot issues might not be solved? I mean, it seemed like he was a good rebounder his first 2 years. Then he had mono. You could blame the lack of rebounding on just maybe a lack of energy. Then the next year has the foot issue. Is that a concern long term? I mean, I know they just signed him to a contract extension, so it's probably not too big of a concern. But are there lingering thoughts about that?
Interestingly, he was eligible for the max, and everybody referred to it as a max contract, and it was max in dollars, 4 years, $60 million. Excuse me. But it was not max in years. You could go 5 years, and they did not go to a fifth year. So I think that speaks at least a little bit to those concerns. I also think that anytime you've got a 7-footer with foot injuries, you have to be worried. That was Yao Ming's downfall, as we know. I believe that was Todd McCullough's downfall. I'm trying to remember the whole.
The great Todd McCullough.
There's a list somewhere, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but there's a list of 7-footers whose careers have gone down because of foot injuries.
Bill Walton.
Yeah, I mean it's troubling. I think for anybody. Now, all that said, he's still pretty young. I think by all reports he's completely sound and everything, but you just never know with this stuff.
Sure.
And that's that is a big contract, but that's, as you guys were talking about earlier, that's just the way it goes with 7-footers in the NBA.
Yeah, I want to go shift way back to something we talked about in the chat. You love Karl Malone. What is this?
Yeah, I knew that would get you. Karl Malone played exactly one season for the Lakers when I was covering the Lakers. That was my last season out there, in fact. And he was one of those guys that at a distance you thought, man, this guy's kind of ornery. And I saw the way he was with the Utah media. And he'd gotten, after 20 years in Utah, that had become kind of a dicey relationship, kind of love-hate. Like anything Karl Malone did, he could sneeze, and it was A1 news in the Salt Lake Tribune. And I think it's just that spotlight and the fact that he was carrying the entire state on his shoulders. I think it got to him after a while. So the Karl Malone we got in LA that year, two things. One, it was this complete change of scenery, and now he's just blending in with all the other stars in LA, whether it's basketball stars or movie stars or whatever. So there was a comfort level. His mom passed away. His mom, who he was very close to and revered, passed away the summer before he got to LA too. And so the Karl Malone we got that year in 2003-04 was a very different guy. He was, and I shouldn't say completely different. I would say he's different with the media. Your media persona is not who you are. But he was different, I think, with the media than he was in his later days in Salt Lake. But he couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been more thoughtful, more patient. Just a great guy to talk to. He'd sit there after every game for an extra half hour. His feet are in a bucket of ice. His shirt's off. He's just got a towel on. He's showing off that big Adonis, muscular body. He's just hanging out, just shooting the shit, just talking, on the record, off the record, whatever. And would talk as long as anybody wanted to talk to him. And as I say, just couldn't have been nicer, more thoughtful. And that was a tough year, too, for the Shaq-Kobe dynamic, one of many. And Karl was, one of those voices of reason that year too. So he was a joy to deal with. And so for a guy that I only covered one season, right near the top of my list of all-time favorites. So I apologize, Beckley, if that offends you.
It does, deeply.
Well, the only thing that would have made that story better is if you talked about how you hate Seattle or something like that. That's when you really get to Beckley.
No, but it does remind me that.
Yeah, let me sneak that in there then.
Having nothing to do with Seattle, I should say this because one of the great things about dealing with Karl was all these Karlisms of this, this country boy, as Jack McCallum was describing earlier. So Karl every so often would just drop some expression, and I'd look at him like I have no idea what he's saying. So it was like day 5 or day 6 or whatever of the Shaq-Kobe crisis to start that season. and we're asking Carl another question about it, and he just looks at it. He looks at us and he goes, "Man, y'all trying to kick a fart out of a dead mule." I said, What? Y'all trying to kick a fart out of a dead mule?" I call him, "I'm sorry, man," like somewhere between the Louisiana drawl and his expression, I could, and he says, "Fart. You're trying to kick a fart out of a dead mule." I'm like, I had to like think about it for a second, but oh, okay, that kind of makes sense to me now. But Carl was great for these the Southern expressions he threw out. I had no idea what he was talking about, but he was great.
My dad's from the South, so I can relate. He says half the things he said I can't even understand. Who was a player like Karl Malone of that stature, maybe historically, that you had similar thoughts on? Of it was just fun to sit around and kind of shoot the breeze with that guy about anything, whether it was on or off the record.
That's a good question. Robert Horry was great that way too. All the Southern guys, they're all really they're like down to earth. Just Robert Horry was great that way. Rick Fox has always been one of my all-time favorites from those Laker days. Horace Grant was great. Brian Shaw, Ron Harper. That was the thing. Like, people think about, you got to cover the Lakers and those 3 championships and Shaq and Kobe in the prime, and yeah, there was like some spectacular basketball and some great drama. But like the best guys to deal with are often not the stars. Because the stars have so many more demands on them. It's not singling them out saying they're bad guys. It's just they get worn out by the process, I think, a lot faster. And so, in every locker room, you hope you have like these great role guys who not only are good players, but just have that perspective, who like to talk, who are thoughtful about it, who can just kind of put everything in context. And that was one of the great things about those Laker teams, is that there were so many of these guys: Derek Fisher, Rick Fox, Robert Horry, Horace Grant, Brian Shaw, Ron Harper, and just great talkers, fun guys. And yeah, when the tape recorders were off or the notepads were away, they were just guys to shoot the shit with, and normal, good, normal, all-around guys.
Yeah, well, now the Lakers have Steve Nash, who is as good for a quote as any player in the NBA. I think a large part of why he is so revered is not just because of the way he plays, but the way he conducts himself. I mean, he's very charming. He's very earnest when he talks to the media, and he's known to be as good of a locker room guy as it gets. He's going into a locker room that's been a dicey place, reportedly, for a couple years. What did you think when you saw that happen, and how do you see that all playing out?
I think it's going to be really good for them. I mean, the obvious thing is, look, this is a team that struggled defensively against the Thunder in the playoffs, and Steve Nash is not going to improve anybody's defense. But the one thing I've said there is,
he also struggled to score against them, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the other problems they have, too, that's not solved by this, of course, is their bench. Their bench is still a disaster, and I don't know what they're going to do about that, because I thought that was a terrible weakness of theirs in the playoffs as well. But basketball is, as we know, a two-way game. If you can score a few more points, then the couple points you're giving up may not be as bad. If you take away a couple more points from your opponent, maybe you make up for your scoring problems. But I think that offense could just be electric with him. And I think Kobe plays great off the ball. And Beckley and I talked about this earlier. I don't think there's any clash at all, should be any concern whatsoever about Steve Nash and Kobe Bryant having to share the ball or anything like that. Kobe's going to love the fact that he doesn't have to take all of it on himself, make the plays, find open guys, score for himself. He's going to be, I think he'll be rejuvenated by this. And Nash could be too, because, they're different ages, but they've both got a lot of mileage on them. So being able to lean on each other a bit is going to be great for both of them. But to your point about the locker room, once Phil Jackson was gone, and then they lost Lamar Odom, or they traded away Lamar Odom, and they traded away Derek Fisher, they really were missing a little bit of that stabilizing element in the locker room. And people around the team had told me during the playoffs, they thought that's where things started to go awry with Andrew Bynum, that there wasn't that person to kind of pull him back to the group. That would have been Lamar Odom, that would have been Derek Fisher, it would have been Phil Jackson. Like, they'd lost these staying voices. And to your conversation of earlier about, Kobe, yeah, I think Jack might have touched on this too. I mean, Kobe he's a leader in a very specific kind of way. Kobe's the, kick your ass, drill sergeant, beat you down if you're not, with the program kind of leader. And Derek Fisher was, I think they had joked about this, that Derek Fisher was like the Barack Obama to his Malcolm X, basically. And, I can't take credit for that. Somebody, I think, had written that, or Derek Fisher might have even said it before. But they need that. You know,
really interesting implications on all fronts. Yeah.
Don't go any deeper than what it.
Yeah.
But Fish has that great steadying, moderating kind of tone, and Kobe's really, really intense. So could Steve Nash replace that? Yeah, I think he can. He comes in obviously with instant credibility from day one, and they do. I think they need that that kind of counterbalance there, that yin and yang.
Sure. Well, I think that's going to be pretty much the most interesting story of and it's going to be covered relentlessly, I'm sure. Nash and Kobe's, how that all works out. It's, Wade and LeBron were two guys who were friends who intentionally kind of figured out that they wanted to play together. And it took them time to sort it out. They're both about 10 years younger than Nash. And so I just wonder if maybe the perspective that Nash has, he's really not going to build something as much as take advantage of something while he still can. But I just think it's really hard when you've been the guy, and not in a selfish way, but just in a functional way, to figure it out on the fly. They're going to have a good training camp, and as you say, they're so smart, you can't put it past them to sort it all out.
Yeah, I agree with you on all accounts there, that, we sometimes oversimplify these things. Like, even when guys seem to fit together perfectly, you say, oh, this talent meshes with that talent. You still need time. You still need, whether it's, training camp, preseason games. And, yeah, these guys don't have that great of a window to do it. But that said, I think those two know each other pretty well. They've been playing against each other and in the same circles for a long time. And they're really both very intelligent basketball players. So if anybody could do it on the fly and quickly enough to get off on the right foot, I think they can. And also, it's not a brand new team. The thing with the Miami Heat was it wasn't just LeBron and Wade. It was a completely brand new team starting on day one. The Lakers are still largely the Lakers. Gasol, Bynum, Kobe, Artest, and then Nash comes in. It's a really potent lineup, and most of those guys already have a feel for each other. And Nash is going to make life so much easier on the Laker bigs too. So, it's going to be fascinating. I can't wait to see how that all pans out.
Yeah, Boston figured it out quickly, and they were guys like Nash who had, I think, a similar mindset in what they were trying to achieve there. Thanks a lot for coming on, Howard. This is fun.
Absolutely. It's great. Thanks, guys.
Get some sleep, man.
I'm going to.
All right, that was Howard Beck from the New York Times. He'll be shifting from Knicks coverage to the Nets, and as you heard there, expert of mid-aughts Lakers. All right, to finish the show, we are going to do one giant smash, one giant dagger, one giant noted, all rolled up into one. Mr. Zach Harper, please eulogize the Darko Milicic era.
Darko, it wasn't his fault that he was the number pick. It wasn't his fault that he had expectations thrown on him because he was switched between LeBron and Carmelo Anthony. It wasn't his fault that he wasn't really coached by Larry Brown. He wasn't really considered. He wasn't really, given time or a chance or anything to really prosper in those first years of his career. And then he moved on to New York and Orlando, and he wound up in Minnesota. And it's not his fault David Kahn said he was as good a passing big as Chris Webber or Vlade Divac, and that he was manna from heaven. None of that's his fault. Let me tell you what is his fault. His fault is that he doesn't care about anything. This is a guy who, I watched in the locker room, he played 0.7 seconds against the Philadelphia 76ers this last season. His only time in the game. The only play was an inbound alley-oop that he tipped away. The thing is, he tipped it off his own backboard. And players after the game were joking about how they expected that to go in because, quote-unquote, that would be the most Darko thing ever. This is the problem. He fostered this idea that he is a joke. It's not that I'm being too hard on him. It's not that Timberwolves fans or Bill Simmons or anybody is being too hard on Darko Milicic. And it's his fault that he sucks. It's not his fault that he had the expectations, but it's his fault that he sucks. This is a guy that got injured twice 2 seasons ago on jump balls. Opening tips of the game. Injured on a jump ball. How does that happen? He was out of shape. Rick Alderman called him out of shape this season. He wasn't allowed to play because of it. He started to get back into better shape, did his conditioning test. During the conditioning test, he got injured because it's just what he sets himself up for. He is a joke because of himself, not because of the expectations. The expectations weren't his fault, but the joke was his fault because he just doesn't care. And I'm so glad. I don't care that the Timberwolves have to pay him, mainly because it's not my money, but mainly I don't care that they have to pay him that he's gone. He's just gone. I'm a little sad because Peck is his friend, and Peck might smash the Target Center. That could be bad. But Darko was gone, and this cloud of suck is away from the locker room. It's still up in the front office a little bit, but it's away from the locker room. And for that, I'm so happy that Darko's Timberwolves career will rest in peace.
One last thank you, Zach. One last note before we say goodbye. Thanks to our guests, thanks to our viewers, and good luck, Ramon Sessions. You are finalizing a multi-year deal to go to the Charlotte Bobcats. Moments away from probably thinking you were going to go to a finals at some point. You are now going to the Bobcats. Enjoy that tiny shoot-first backcourt. And thank you to all the viewers. Thank you to our guests, Howard Beck, Jack McCallum. Thank you to Peep and James Herbert, Zach Harper, Ethan Sherwood-Strauss. See ya.